Hi everyone, and welcome to the latest GESS Talks webinar, Online and Alternative Learning Concepts. We'd like to thank everyone for logging on and listening. Our panel will explore the dynamic world of online education and innovative learning methods that cater to diverse needs and learning styles, whilst also preparing students for the future workplace. So it's going to be a really good one. A few bits of information before we get underway. You'll find a control panel on the side. There's a Q&A tab and also one for handouts. This is where you can find relevant brochures and handouts from our panelists, and I can see there's 3 or 4 in there, so do make sure you can check them out, and you can browse and download them at any time. Also feel free to use the Q&A, ask us questions. As a panelist, would love to hear from you, and we'll try and address as many of them as we can before the end of the webinar. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our amazing chair and moderator, Raya Bidshahri, founder and CEO of the School of Humanity, to introduce the rest of the panel. Thank you, and over to you, Raya.
Thank you, Sarah, and hello, everyone. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you're joining in from. I'm really excited to be having this conversation today. Now, I'm going to introduce our panel in a moment, but before that, just a brief introduction to me. I'm Raya. I'm the founder and CEO of School of Humanity. We're an innovative online high school where our learners learn by having a positive impact on the world. We follow a completely interdisciplinary curriculum and a challenge-based curriculum, and we increasingly partner with both private and public schools who wish to innovate and reimagine how they teach and how we learn in schools. Now, we're here today to discuss this topic, and it's a really, really crucial topic because our world increasingly needs more alternatives when it comes to our schooling and education systems. So let's start with a few sobering statistics in case you don't already believe that we need more alternatives in our education system. According to a report from Yale University in the US, 70% of students in the US report negative feelings, predominantly negative feelings towards school, including hating going to school. In the UK, we're seeing a surge of school refusers. Last summer alone, there were 140,000 children that were severely absent from the classroom, and some reports go even higher than that. According to Young Minds, 3.5 million young people aged 6 to 23 are struggling with possible or probable mental health problems in the UK. And what's even more interesting is just saw in the news today from Times that there is a growing number of private schools moving away from the GCSEs towards their own qualifications. And so that, combined with the complexity of the challenges of our world, the complexity and impact of the rise of artificial intelligence, the rise of entirely new industries, is just calling for alternatives. It's calling for different models of education to serve today's world. And that doesn't necessarily mean we obliterate the existing system. It just means giving families, learners, parents, innovative online alternative ways of learning. Now, just a few definitions before I ask the panel to introduce themselves. When we talk about alternative learning concepts, at least in the context of this discussion, we're really looking at a couple of things. We're looking at often more progressive pedagogies, such as mastery-based learning, challenge-based learning, curiosity-led learning. We're looking at alternative frameworks for schooling, moving away from the industrial era model towards completely novel models. And as you can see, we're also having an emphasis on this discussion on online, on digital, because that plays a huge role in terms of making such models scalable, accessible globally. So they're a big part of today's discussion. So without further ado, I am going to invite our panelists to introduce themselves. We have a range of incredible organizations, speakers, from innovative high schools to innovative solution providers. So I'm going to start with Russel, who's the managing director at the Think Learning Studio. Russel, please tell us a little bit about your work.
Thanks, Raya. Yes, I've led Think Global School for a number of years, which is the world's first traveling school. It attends 4 different countries per year, and like Raya's school is a completely different type of learning environment, which is project-based, no exams. The students learn through portfolios, and they create their own learning path for about 80% of the curriculum. After 7 years there, I left and founded the Think Learning Studio, And that's what we're currently doing now. So we work with a number of government entities and schooling entities around the world to really upskill and upscale teachers and educators into these alternative frameworks. We don't necessarily push the Think Global School method because that's not for everybody, but we certainly push a different way of teaching, which we believe, just as Raya said in the intro, we believe the kind of chalk and talk, stand and deliver education model has kind of had its day, and we've got to rethink that and redesign that. And that's what we've done over the last 10 years. So yeah, that's my journey into this webinar.
Amazing. Thank you, Russel. And I'm looking forward to learning more about the curriculum that you offer. Next, I'd love to invite Skyler, who's the co-founder and chief Handraiser, I love that title, of Infini-D Learning.
Thank you, Raya. Full disclosure to everyone, I am just as impressed with this panel as anyone that's attending this. I went and researched everyone and was blown away. And I got my career in education started by being a STEM teacher. So at my heart, I'm a nerd. I'm the guy wearing the space shirt on an international webinar. I'm willing to own that. But we're working on building the most ridiculously engaging experiential learning platform the world's ever seen with Infini-D. And the way it works for us is largely, based around what you've highlighted here, Raya. We need to help prepare kids for the future in a way that's actually going to be meaningful for them, that's actually going to help move the needle and unlock potential. We can't just be focusing on teaching kids to remember information. So our whole experience is built around giving teachers a tool where they can go into our online library, they can choose a standard, and when they choose that standard, it generates what we call a mission. And this mission is a full class experience where every single student's on a device and they have to work together, they have to share information, analyze data, make decisions, but it's 100% adaptive. So based off of how they're performing, they will either solve the problem, create a solution and win, or they will die in some horrific simulated way and they'll have to go back and try again. We love authenticity. We love giving kids the chance to actually use information in meaningful ways. So I'm so excited to learn from this panel and share any insights we've had along the way. We started this in our own classroom and it grew from our school to 8 schools, then 80 schools, then 200 schools, then 600 schools. And we are just so excited that the world seems more primed to accept these alternative, even though I think that's a funny word, education models.
Amazing. Thank you, Skyler. And I love the shirt, so no apologies needed there. Hanan, I'd love to learn more about you. So tell us a little bit about yourself and your work at iCodejr.
Sure. Thanks, Raya. Before I begin, I'd like to take a bow to all our panelists. All of you are making substantial dents in the online alternative learning space. And I'm in awe of everything that you're building. So kudos to you. My name is Hanan. I'm one of the co-founders of iCodejr. We're an online-first coding and robotics academy focused on the K-12 segment. While we do work with schools and academic institutions in the UAE, we predominantly focus on online. We're also the first academy to offer Web3 programs. Using our workshops, we essentially edify and upskill school students in the coding and STEM space. We essentially started off because we noticed a massive void between what schools were doing in STEM versus in the region, what schools were doing in STEM versus what students were being taught in, say, the US or the UK. And that's the void that we're hoping to fill. Our mission is to make sure that we empower our students to sort of be able to compete on a global landscape. So yeah, moving on that mission.
Oops. Thank you so much, Hanan. And I'm really curious to then later in the panel talk more about the impact of AI on all of this and the literacies that we need for today's world. Last but not least, I'm going to invite Carl to tell us a little bit about the online school where he's the co-founder.
Hi, I'm Carl, co-founder of the online school. So I've worked in education for just over a decade now after furiously fighting against becoming a teacher. I was told when I left university it's probably the career I should do and I'd make a great teacher, and I'd tutored for a long time. And I just didn't think it was an engaging career. I didn't think it was something that I really wanted to be a part of. So I decided to become an auditor instead, which was far less engaging, probably not a great decision. And I actually ended up coming to education in a sort of career break situation. I came to Dubai as a tutor, and I thought, this is probably not something I'm going to stick with. It's something that I'll do for a bit. I've got some experience doing it. And then I was asked to homeschool a student, and in that experience of homeschooling the student, I realized how empowering it was to be a teacher who had ultimate flexibility in a student's education. And this got me really excited. So the company I was working for, I kind of rose up through the ranks, and homeschooling was my big thing. This is what I wanted to grow. This was the area that I wanted to grow. And eventually I became the principal of a small school in Oxford in the UK, where all the programs were delivered one-to-one. So it's sort of a homeschooling with more regulation type thing. And again, the freedom was great, and the programs we put together were amazing and so personalized. And this is really where the online school came out of, because I started to think, this is something that everyone should have access to. Everyone should have access to this level of personalized education, but to do it the way we were doing it in my previous company was just prohibitively expensive. And so I sat down, I got a team together, and I started conceptualizing what I thought an online school was, and not just putting online lessons together and Zooming and having teachers connect online. What I really boiled it down to was community, and the idea is, you should be able to create a digital community of educators, parents, students, and the online school becomes a window into this community of support and engagement. And this is really where our engagement factor comes from, that we're not kind of AI driven. You're never going to speak to a human. It's the online school. The core premise behind it is it should be a window into all these other people that can support you with really engaging content. And the kind of North Star, the thing that we always think about, is agility. The world's moving far faster than the education system is, and that gap is widening. And we need to be more agile in order to bridge that gap. And I think that's what we're trying to solve with the online school.
Amazing. I think for the longest time, the perception was that online education would just digitize the status quo. So I love that we're seeing a rise of innovative online education that's also reimagining what we learn and how we learn it, in addition to digitizing it. So I'd love to go a bit deeper into each of your works and really kind of go into the meat of the topic. So Russel, I think starting with you, I think one of the things I absolutely admire about the Think Global Schools curriculum is that you decided not to adopt any of the traditional kind of exam-based or qualification-based curriculum and created your own change-makers curriculum, as you call it, which is an interdisciplinary and project-based curriculum. Could you tell us a little bit more about that and what it took to take that approach as a school?
Yes, of course. We were an IB school for quite a long time, and a successful IB school. But I remember there was a kind of pivotal moment when we were on term in Japan, and we were kind of looking for the grade 12s, and we couldn't find them anywhere. We were on exploration in Tokyo. And I went to one of my staff, and we were talking about, where are they? Where are the grade 12s? And anyway, as diligent as Think Global School students are, they're all in their bedrooms revising for the exams that were coming in a few months. So we kind of just had a bit of a crisis and sat down and said, okay, we've got to do this differently. And luckily, the headmaster at the time was very much in favor of project-based learning and a visionary in project-based learning. And we embarked on this journey to first map the curriculum. We sent a team around the world to find locations and projects that could work. So we built this skeleton framework. And then we kind of just went for it. And we had a lot of people say we were crazy and, why are you doing this? And this is a terrible way to go. I had a good friend of mine tell me I was throwing my career away by potentially being part of this school that was going down this path in case it went calamitously wrong. Luckily, it didn't. And 10 years ago, we introduced Changemaker. We introduced this curriculum you described. And I remember some of the pivotal moments where, what will the parents say? What will universities say? Will anyone apply? And I remember the application pool of the first Changemaker group was to kind of double the metrics of the IB. So I think we got a taste then of, okay, we're going to be okay. I think that I remember that being a pivotal moment when we got the data in from our admissions team from New York that we were kind of doubled from the same point the previous year, which was an IB year. So that was kind of heartening to know that people wanted the product. And then I think we had to deliver on it. And there was failings and hiccups along the way. But ultimately, I just remember thinking, because I had this conversation recently, I couldn't go back to where we were. Like I was a history teacher in the A-level IB world. And, you'd go up there, sociology, history were my domains. And I think of the old classes and kind of churning that out 4 times a day, same curriculum year after year. And I think back now, like I could never do that again. And I don't think the staff could either, So I think once you are exposed to this new world, I think the 5 of us are endorsing, it is a lot of work on the front end, but I also believe you're going to get, and to some of the statistics you raised before, Raya, the idea is we are going to get happier learners. We do the Hope survey, and those results have gone through the roof since we changed the curriculum. We have a happier staff teaching this way. There's uncertainty. Portfolio-based learning, which is how we assess, is a little uncertain, and there's some locking down of concepts we have to do there. But it's a better world. It's a better pathway than this 3-hour memory test. That, let's be honest, we have to do better than that. I mean, like you said at the start, I'm not saying that has to be removed from the whole tapestry of a curriculum. Of course, you can test. Some people will. They won't let that go. Fine. But it all being on that test, I think, is what we're all really adamantly against. And I don't see that as crazily controversial anymore, like maybe I did 10, 11 years ago.
No, I couldn't agree more. I think we're seeing a very similar trend at School of Humanity. We are just growing to, we just doubled our high school cohort this fall with learners from 15 countries. And what's interesting is like what you said, there are families and learners who want that alternative, who want a non-exam based curriculum and approach and are excited to take that leap. And I think everyone, the ecosystem is grateful for schools like Think Global that pioneered this, a decade ago before we started having panel discussions on it at global leading conferences. So thank you for that. Carl, when I was looking into the online school, I saw that you were an advocate for something called decentralized schooling, which I think is fascinating. So could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. I think actually you mentioned an article earlier about schools moving away from these kind of big externally examined exams, GCSEs, to their own examinations. And I think it was Latimer that had just announced that they're going to do that in 2027, and B-Dale's already have their own version of GCSEs, and we're seeing this happen more and more. So I think what we're going to see over the next few years is more schools decide to take their own approach to qualifications. And I think that plays into what Russell just said. I know Latimer had said that they're going to do a lot more Vivas and portfolio work and put less on the exam. Some people will still say the exam is the be all and end all, and some people will say, well, we want to assess differently. And I think where decentralized schooling comes in is sort of a little bit after that. So once we've got all these schools with their own version of a qualification, what you could do then is allow students to pick specific subjects from different schools. So you say, okay, I really like Latimer's math course, so I'll do their math, but I love B-Dale's English, so I'm going to do that. And I think where this is really important is, I think most educators know about a famous study called the Bloom 2 Sigma study that showed that effectively, in a nutshell, it showed that one-to-one tuition, highly personalized tuition, has significant effects on grades, and it pushes pretty much every grade up by at least 2 grades. And this is hugely significant, but it's a massive problem because you can't give everyone one-to-one tuition. It just doesn't work like that. But I've always believed that the reason that study is so significant is that it's due to the personalization of one-to-one tuition, and it's kind of due to the ownership that you get in that one-to-one lesson. I definitely feel when I'm homeschooling a student, the student feels like they own their education much more than I did when I attended a school and did my GCSEs and felt like everything was being decided for me. And I think if we move to this world of decentralized schooling where you can pick and choose your subjects from multiple sources, you are effectively allowing more personalization. If every school has a slightly different way of delivering these subjects and every student has the complete freedom to pick and choose, then you have given more ownership and you've given much more personalization to these students. And I think it would have massive impacts on grades and student happiness. As you mentioned, a lot of student unhappiness actually comes from this kind of feeling that you're just being swept along and that you don't really have much choice. But in order to realize a future of decentralized schooling, you do need some sort of verification. You do need somewhere to collect these kind of transcripts and put them all together and kind of think, okay, this is my portfolio or learner profile or whatever you want to call it. And this is really what we're trying to do with the online school and working with major school partners and school groups and kind of saying, right, if we could say, you like the online schools maths course, do this here, but we actually can host one of your courses. And I think this is where online schooling is very important, because obviously to do this, you can't be in two places at once. So you will necessarily have to have some component of online schooling.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating, and you've touched on a really crucial topic, which is around how we scale such models of education. And I think it's a question that every alternative school eventually faces, because project-based learning, personalized learning, and tutoring inherently can be difficult to amplify to masses, although that's obviously now changing with access to technology. And I think that brings me nicely to a question for Skyler. In terms of you guys' work and your work with Infini-D learning, you've really had an impact on tens of thousands of schools. So I guess my question to you is, how do you see us scaling innovative education to hundreds of thousands of learners globally?
Ooh, such a good question. And a part of what we've experienced is, because we were a team of teachers and nerds, we did not have a go-to-market strategy. We did not have a complex sales force, or we didn't even have investors. This was totally just bootstrapped because we believed in what we were doing. And what we discovered in that process is it just needs to work. And by work, it needs to be a lot more than, are we teaching kids how to be good at remembering? Or are we actually preparing them for the future? Are we actually filling these holes that we're putting on teachers' shoulders? I mean, we've all heard the stats, or we've always heard this comparison. 150 years ago, you interviewed the Fortune 500 globally, and their top 3 skills that they want are reading, writing, and arithmetic. The World Economic Forum just did that again in May and released their future jobs report, and the top 3 were analytical thinking, creativity, and resilience. And yet there's no resources, there's no support within the traditional system. So it either leaves it on the shoulders of the student to somehow figure that out on their own along the way, or it leaves it on the shoulders of the teacher to invent something when they're already overworked, underappreciated, and underpaid. So to be quite frank, I always get really frustrated when I use tools, especially in today's kind of era of incremental improvements. I mean, if you saw, I am an Apple guy, so I'm going to slight them a bit. I mean, you saw the announcement of the iPhone 15. I'll tell you what, when I picked up my phone the other day, I did not say, ooh, this is 1 gram too heavy. I'm so tired of these tiny little steps forward. We have to take a massive leap, and it has to work. So for us, what we found was to really get it to scale and to get it to mean something without pouring millions of dollars behind it, or huge marketing budget, huge sales forces, is it needs to work in an authentic way. We have a generation of kids that are digital natives that went through COVID and experienced every possible pedagogy as we panicked and tried to throw everything at them. They are experts at all of these different modalities and styles of learning. And then they come back and we just throw them into the same straightforward, all right, here's the bubble sheets, multiple choice tests, memorize this content. And they're just not getting what's actually going to prepare them for the future. And that is so critical. If you ever want to scale, we need to meet those needs. We need to fill those gaps. And I've always loved the concept of innovative and progressive learning styles. It kind of can trick us into thinking that we're at the cutting edge or we're leading. We're just trying to catch up. I think Carl said it perfectly. like the world is changing so quickly, and Hanan was hinting at like things are changing quicker than we can. We're just trying to keep up, and it's so critical that we do that.
I love that. It reminded me of there's a framework that Google uses for innovation called moonshot thinking. It's the idea of 10xing solutions rather than 10%ing them. So applying moonshot thinking to our education system, and it sounds like Apple needs to do the same with their products. Hanan, you touched on this briefly, which is the idea, the fact that STEM curriculum, especially coding curriculum in schools, really needs to keep up with the needs of industry. I'm curious about how you see alternative learning concepts or pedagogies playing a role in that, especially in a world that's increasingly shaped and transformed by technology.
Yeah, that's a great question. But before that, how many of us have actually bought into the hype? Who's going to get the iPhone 15? Show of hands? No, not so much. All right. No, it's a great question, Raya. And for us, we're a vocational learning academy, right? Schools are a house of learning. Students go there to, edify, to learn. But I think Skyler can agree that when you're a vocational program, you only have to try harder to make sure that you're making a mark on students, that they adapt to, relate to, and enjoy what they're doing with you. So for us at iCodejr, alternative learning isn't more of a crutch to support, but in fact the norm, right? It's something that we need to do beyond the conventional so that our students can, in fact, have a solid takeaway from our program. Because conventional pedagogy just doesn't cut it anymore, right? I mean, it's just theoretical. It's just very streamlined. But in the age of instant gratification, the kind of takeaways we get with alternative learning is second to none. So I'll give you an example, right? So with our programs in Web3 and blockchain, we try to replicate the principle of getting a gold star in school by allocating points to our students. Now, leaderboards, points isn't really a new concept, but what we did instead is we created our own crypto token, and we're trying it with a few students, and we started giving them cryptocurrency for rewards, whether they attend a program in time, if they've completed assignments and homework. And what we learned is that they've actually not just begun to appreciate crypto tokens, they've also started to understand how blockchain works. A lot of them are very keen on jumping to the program where they can actually go ahead and create their own cryptocurrency. But a lot of them are actually coming to class on time, completing their assignments so they can encash those tokens for iCodejr t-shirts. Now, that may not be much of a reward, but it has incentivized them to learn. It has incentivized them to appreciate the technology. And that's essentially helping us get closer to our goal. Using the metaverse, for instance, I think could be an amazing tool for alternative learning. Imagine we create a metaverse for iCodejr. You've got your VR headsets on, and instead of writing code, you just drag and drop snippets and see what the results are like, right? AI, you spoke about AI. I think AI is definitely the future. We're definitely just scraping, we're 10, 20 years away from actual AI right now. All we do is essentially machine learning in AI. But leveraging tools like ChatGPT responsibly, and when I say responsibly is by making sure that it's enhancing the student's experience rather than just giving them the answer, right? Those are the kind of tools that students really need. So our next initiative right now is to sort of sandbox ChatGPT, where we can create a teacher's assistant that can help teachers and students arrive at their destination using a series of prompts and answers rather than just feeding it to them. So yeah, alternative learning is not a crutch or a support. It's essentially the norm for us.
Incredible. And as you were describing that, Hanan, I was imagining an alternative economic system for our world that is driven by learning. I think that would be a really, really fascinating model to explore. The next question actually connects to a comment that we've received in the chat. So one of the misconceptions, or two of the misconceptions often with online schooling or learning, is that A, socialization is completely limited, and B, that accountability doesn't happen. And before I pose this question, I just wanted to share a little bit about our experiences at School of Humanities. So we're obviously a fully online school. We're now starting to explore with hybrid learning as well, which we believe is the future. And we have learners from all around the world and different socioeconomic backgrounds joining our sessions. We just had our orientation week, and within the first day, our learners had set up their own Discord channel. We're absolutely blowing up the social channel on our Slack today and making all kinds of friendships. That's not to say that that replaces in-person friendships and connection. That's crucial. But it does happen in online learning, especially as Carl points out, if you create the community for it. So one of the things we try to do is host game nights, host socials. We actually have learners visiting each other in different countries now, forming global friendships, which is obviously really cool. And it's crucial that every family who enrolls their children in online or even homeschooling has a plan for in-person socialization. So a lot of our learners will do other extracurriculars and other sports and hang out with their friends for the rest of the day. And that's a really, really crucial part of the experience in order to balance out screen time and online learning time. So I'm just sharing that to kind of share that actually in practice, it's not, just a learner in front of a screen the whole time. Even the sessions that they're on are really interactive and really game-based and really discussion-based to make sure it's as social as possible. So Carl, I'd love to hear from you on this issue as well, and also around the accountability. I'm curious about how you have tackled the socialization piece and the accountability of learners in an online context.
Yeah, so socialization is kind of the number one concern. When we talk to parents, it's the thing that people worry about the most. But actually, once they've been through a program, we've had comments like parents come to us and say, "You've given my child their childhood back," and this is because most people don't think of going to work every day 9 to 5 as their social activity, but for some reason we've decided that is what school is. It is, and it is great. It is a great social playground, but it isn't the only place students can socialize. And if you allow students to perhaps work in a more flexible manner, in a way that isn't restricted to certain time zones, it isn't restricted to certain geographies, you often find that students can be far more social. You don't spend 6 or 7 hours a day in school and then too exhausted to go to your tennis club after school. You can break the day up and play tennis in the middle of the day if you choose to. And we find that actually this works much better, and it actually plays into that kind of learner accountability and that motivation, because the way we tackle accountability is initially with trying to motivate students to learn as best they can. And if they can see that we care about the things that they care about, this is enormous impact on students' motivation to learn and how accountable they feel about the subjects and their studies. And so if we're moving your program around and saying, okay, you seem to work best by starting a little bit late, doing a couple of hours, maybe doing a sport then to break the day up and then coming back, they can see that we've really thought about this with them at the center of it. So what we do is we break the kind of motivation down into intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. And just like Hanan said, we offer our students rewards for learning as well through a kind of point system that they can then trade in for various things, vouchers for Amazon or perhaps t-shirts as well. And this is something that works really well in a kind of extrinsic point of view, this kind of carrot that just keeps you moving along. I just want enough points to get this next reward. But that doesn't really work completely without intrinsic motivation. And the intrinsic motivation was to make the content that students work on independently very engaging. So the idea is that when you're sat in front of a tutor, they're personalizing it for you. Our tutors are trained to make that session engaging. That's actually the easy part. The hard part is when we expect you to go away and learn something independently. How do we keep you engaged? And actually the way we did this was by watching hours and hours and hours of TikTok and YouTube and things that the kids are watching. And I remember a year ago when we were first conceptualizing this idea of, can we just get the students motivated by making the content relevant to them? And we said, all right, let's put our money where our mouth is and put some educational content on TikTok. And after a couple of months, we had 10 million views. We're well over 30 million views now, 60,000 followers. It's something that we saw working, and I think the most amazing thing happened was that people are debating it in the comments. They're kind of saying, well, if you think about it like this, then maybe it would be, and they're teaching each other in the comment section. And the real dream moment was when one of the students came in to one of our tutors and said, I've just seen this thing on TikTok. He wasn't aware that it was actually the tutor that he was with that had actually written that content. And he said, can you teach me more about it? And they were like, yes. So this kind of small 60-second hook then led into this much longer hour-long lesson. And I always go back to this thought that if you can get the students to answer a question, that's where the best teaching happens. The best teaching happens in that tangent. So sort of in short, the socialization is not as big of a problem as you think, because with a flexible program, you have way more opportunity than you think, but you do need to plan that, as you said. And then the accountability, it's all about motivation and mentorship.
I love that. That really resonates because, as you can imagine, we obviously, as a challenge-based school, we run challenges instead of courses, and I've always found that learners and young minds are so much more motivated to learn when it's driven by an impact on the world, by a project where they can see the tangible solution rather than memorizing for a test. And that really allows them to tap into that intrinsic motivation. And so, yeah, that's really powerful. Thanks, Carl. Russell, my question for you is actually related to a question we also received in the chat around how we view online degrees versus traditional degrees. And I'm one of the big challenges that alternative curriculum or school providers face is that recognition from universities and governments and regulators. I'm curious about how TGS has tackled this and what lessons you've learned along the way on that front.
Yeah, lots of lessons. We work very closely with our accreditation body. Our accreditation body have been extremely supportive in the evolution of Think Global's curriculum and everything we do. And I think without that, the support of the team over at WASC and how they accredit us and facilitate our inspections and that journey, without their support, this would have been very difficult. I think we have to recognize that. So I think being in the American system has allowed a degree of dynamism and flexibility that the system that I'm from in the UK just doesn't allow. And I've worked behind the curtain. I was 5 years at the exam board. So I've seen the machine at work that churns out the exams and the syllabuses. I'm not just coming at this from someone who is engaged in my school, which of course I love and feel very passionate about, but I've also seen that factory-based mindset of how the exams and the curriculum behind those exams are kind of churned out without the learner at the forefront. In regards to the transcripts, yeah, there is a process, and there is something that needs to be churned out of the back end that is relatable to universities. If we didn't do that, I think we would be doing the young people a disservice. So, I call it a little dance with the devil that we have to do right at the end of each project, where we have to kind of create that and change that into something that the world post TGS understands. But that doesn't really affect the learner in any way. That's really an admin chore on our end. And I think it's good we do that. I think, like I said, I think sometimes, as rebellious as we've been in the system, there are certain things that are kind of just silly if you don't do them at this stage. And the system is very slow to adapt. It does repel innovation, and it does that by design, because it's worked. As much as we don't like it, it has worked for a long time. It's churned out grades, it sifts, sorts, and selects, and it moves people on. The problem is now, I think we've raised the curiosity and consciousness around the system, where we began to ask a lot of questions, and not just us as administrators and educators, the students have. And that's where it gets really powerful when as Carl said before, when the students say, and you mentioned it as well, Raya, with the when the learning isn't real, the students are more and more asking questions like, why am I learning fractions? Like, why am I doing this? Like, when am I actually going to use this? Nothing wrong with fractions, but again, it would help to know where we might use them. And I went through my whole education system and I still don't really have a clue where I'd use a fraction. That's really because my life has taken me in another direction. But again, just pointing the young people, like history, even as a historian, it was only much later in my studies that I really began to understand where I use all the skills that I learned as a historian. It wasn't given to me at school, which I think is kind of criminal that it wasn't. So again, so the transcript and what's kind of thrown out on the back end really needs to represent the journey. It needs to be translatable. And it would also really help if it spoke more than just grades. And I think that through mastery transcripts, through just independent transcripts that are being created by institutions, I think we're seeing that as a theme now. We've seen transcripts. We're getting more. We've been more creative with curriculum, and I think we're going to enter an era now where we get really creative with how we reflect and demonstrate the journey that these young people have been on.
Absolutely, and it's such a crucial part of the innovation is how we communicate how learning has happened and doing so in a way that is recognizable. Our chief learning architect, Kevin, likes to compare it to a currency. There's no point creating a currency that no one understands and there's no exchange rate for, right? You can't use that currency. So I think that's a challenge facing us as a society. And to add to this, to answer Muhammad's question in the chat, there are also regulatory nuances. So in some countries, online degrees are not recognized equally as a regular high school degree. And in some countries, there are laws prohibiting universities from accepting students without that equivalency. So there are barriers from a regulatory perspective. As the answer to this question really depends on the curriculum, the form of the transcript, but also the regulations of the country the learner is studying in and hopes to study at after for higher education. Skyler, I have a question for you. So one of the misconceptions that we often have to confront is that this idea that if you're a progressive or alternative school or even education provider, that you're not doing STEM very well. I don't know why this perception is a thing, but people often ask us, how do you teach English, math, and science? And we often have to explain that we do still teach that. So I would love to hear from you on how Infini-D makes it so engaging, but also ensures rigor in the process of teaching STEM. Yeah.
Oh, Raya, my goodness. What a great question. And I'm still just trying to get over the whole vision that Carl put in my head where one of his colleagues walks in on him recording TikTok videos. And they're like, what are you doing? I'm changing the world of education. Can't you tell? And it's obvious. So congrats on that success. Right. I love the question. I'm going to start with a bold statement. I think that it's not entirely a misconception on a lot of fronts, because I think a lot of the resources and tools that are available, unfortunately, have taken something traditional and put a Band-Aid of engagement on it. We've got these quizzes that are, I'm going to do this quiz and then I get to play this game. And then I get to do the quiz, but I have to do the quiz in order to play the game again. And we're just teaching kids to hate the quiz part because they got to get back to the game. Or we've got these things where kids are racing to answer questions quickly and they're not really learning the content. They're just learning to answer quickly. There's a lot of these elements that there's a time and a place, and I've used and loved a lot of those programs when used correctly, but there is a lack of rigor because we're just breaking it up with this. So I want to share an example that we learned early on about rigor, which was in terms of, and I think a lens that we can look at it through is gamification. Hanan was talking about an awesome way that they gamified theirs with a leaderboard and then the real life tokens they get exchanged. It's a great example for us. We saw that so many examples were not going the distance. They were saying music, characters, teams, leaderboards, like this very surface level was gamification. And we realized the parts that kids love about games, it has nothing to do with the music or the characters or the art or the end result. It is the immersiveness of what they're doing. It's the control they have, and it's the epic scale. And so we wanted to capture that. So in our design, let's use Russell's example. If you're learning about fractions, something that you do not care about, and you're wondering, when in the world am I ever going to use this? For us, this is why we wanted to build the tool the way that we did, is we will give the teacher that standard of fractions. And they just need to tell the students, all right, we're going to learn this because at the end of the week, we're going on a mission. And if you don't know this, we probably won't survive. So you should probably pay attention. Boom, we just gave them an epic scale and a reason to pay attention. So that is checked off number one. When the students have actually learned, they go into this experience, and Raya, I cannot overstate the nerd side, okay? I want to make sure that's totally clear, because we're going into outer space, we're going into the human body, back in time. It's like a magic school bus on steroids. And so when we're talking about fractions, instead of giving them a list of problems they need to solve and identifying the numerator and the denominator and trying to find the common, no one cares about that. There's no context. There's no immersiveness to it. So what we do is we ignore the gaming part and we create a scenario similar to what you've talked about, Raya, that challenge-based learning, that purpose that we're pushing towards. So in our experience, we actually have a 5th grade mission where the kids are protecting a planet from asteroids, and they get to chart their trajectory based and using that standard of fractions. So they see the context, they see how it matters, they see the slope of the intercept, they see where it's going to hit. And if they get it right, they got to save the world. That's the epic scale we're talking about. And if they get it wrong, it hits the earth, they see a big explosion, and then everything cuts out and they get to review the data, go back and try again. Anyone that says that that's not rigorous is completely fooling themselves, because when you can put the kids in the context of something real, and everyone here has talked about it in such an amazing way, and they're all amazing examples of how we can make something authentic, where the students are not just getting talked at, and they're not just getting information that they know they can look up anytime on their phone. That's so disconnected and so inauthentic for these kids. But when we give them something that shows them how to solve real problems, and when we talk about STEM or STEAM, that's what it is. It's how do we solve problems? How am I good at thinking through something where it's not spelled out for me? So when we create these situations, same problem, talking about these asteroids, for example, hitting the earth, or if we're going back in time and the kids have used their writing skills to solve some historical problem, it's never spelled out. It's always, here's this chart, here's this data, here's these testimonials. How do you compare and analyze that? And how do you really get to a point of rigor in these skills that will actually unlock your potential in the future? We're not in some Victorian era cocktail party where whatever facts I can recall are going to entirely determine my social standing. It is all about my ability to work with others, to be creative, to solve problems. And the more that we can create those kinds of very real scenarios, exactly like you're doing with your challenge-based learning model, that is what's going to move the needle. And that's what's going to create the rigor that actually helps these kids be prepared to meet the demands of tomorrow.
I couldn't agree more. And I'm dying to take one of your lessons. So I'm going to need a demo of Infini-D, but I couldn't agree more, because I think we've also seen that assessments that are project-based or, let's say, problem-based are actually much more rigorous and much harder to cram for, right? You can't just memorize a bunch of things and then do the test, and you have to actually be able to apply it. And that's where also the rigor comes from an assessment and evidencing learning perspective. I have one last question for Hanan, and just to our audience, we're going to move into a bit of audience Q&A. So if you have any questions, comments, please share them in the chat. Hanan, you mentioned on your website that coding isn't just for computer scientists, and learning how to code isn't just for people interested in computer science, which really resonated, because one thing that we also advocate for and we have a whole credit focused on is computational thinking, which is really foundational, I think, for everyone today. So could you share some insights and strategies on how schools can embed this approach of computational thinking into their curriculum for everyone, not just those learners who are interested in coding and computer science?
Right, I think it's easier said than done, right? Ministries of education across the world, they've got a certain format that schools need to follow, right? And Carl spoke about this earlier, right? Agility. It's just very difficult for schools to be agile in the conventional sense, because they've got some norms, right? They've got to do things a certain way. And that's essentially where, everyone here on this panel essentially thrives, is because we can move beyond the conventional, right? So iCodejr, for instance, works with a lot of schools to offer our programs in partnership or in collaboration with schools on site as an after-school program, only because when we had a conversation with the teachers and the principals, they said that, hey, we've got so much to cramp up in an hour, and we've been mandated to do a certain way that it's very difficult for us to sort of deviate or digress from there. Having said that, it's not that there aren't schools. There are certain schools that have tried to at least incorporate subjects, if not the core agenda of computational thinking, by incorporating STEM labs, for instance, which I think is an absolutely great value add, right? Having dedicated topics, subjects that focus on building that cognitive skill set is definitely a value add. But for schools that do struggle to incorporate this part of the core curriculum is where vocational programs can essentially come in. So, long story short, give us a call and we'll help you.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We need to move these extracurricular things these curriculum areas we often put in extracurriculum into the core in order to really give them that importance. So thank you for that, Hanan. We have a great question in the chat around how we are all ensuring inclusion and accessibility across our curriculum, especially for students that might require assistive technology, additional support such as dyslexia and so forth. This is a fantastic question. I'd love to share our answer before opening it up to the panel. So we at School of Humanity, we do have a lot of applications from learners and who have special learning differences, whether it's giftedness or being on the spectrum or having dyslexia. And what we have found is that engaging project-based learning, challenge-based learning inherently often supports that special learning differences in general, because by giving learners autonomy, that level of engagement, and the personalized aspect, you are removing any needs for additional accommodations. You are actually designing the model to be accommodating for all needs, including special learning differences. Now, we do believe and we do see that there are certain cases that might be limiting to address as an online school. So there are certain things as an online school we're not necessarily able to cater for, but I do believe that there's a lot of potential for diverse learning needs in this alternative education space. Opening it up to the panel, are there any best practices you can share, any strategies?
I'll just add something in here. I started running a school just at the start of the pandemic in 2020, and I was very quickly told to close it due to the pandemic. And we had a significant number of students with special educational needs, and I was very concerned about them going online. And what I found was the variety of delivery methods online actually catered to them really well. So being able to say, let's take a lesson and it totally be text-based. Okay, now let's just do the audio, no video. Let's do audio and video. And what we found is in our school, our attendance increased post-pandemic rather than decreased, because we gave them the stepping stones to come back. And this experience it shocked me. It wasn't what I expected. And it's something that I've kind of built into the core of the online school, just the variety of delivery methods. And I think that's also important too in collaboration in the space. Some schools and online schools are much better equipped to deal with students with special educational needs. And I will be the first person to tell you, okay, I'm not sure we're right for you, but I know they are, this other school. And I think collaboration in this space is really what's important, because for me, it's all about the variety of delivery methods, and getting that right gets it right for the student.
I couldn't agree more. It's all about having options, and different models work for different human beings. Amazing. I
can jump in on that one. Yeah, speaking of someone who is dyslexic, I always remember when I got assessed, something on my report has developed incredible coping strategies. And I'd become very skilled as a teenager of hiding my dyslexia. I went to an unforgiving school in Manchester. So that's a terrible thing, though. It's a terrible thing to actually have to cope in school and hide something and become good at it. So I actually saw exactly what Carl saw, is when a traveling school is hit by a pandemic, worst business model ever. When our learners went online, actually, we saw all the same things. They actually were very resilient online. You could cater for so many different approaches. And so, yes, in terms of the online, I fully agree with what Carl said then. And then practically kind of in the trench, so to speak, at Think Global School, we have something called the design scramble, which is how you move through a project. So this might be you first investigate, at some point later on, you design and prototype, you then get your final product ready, and then you kind of evaluate, gather feedback, etc. What we do in the design scramble is you can start at any point. Now, for a different thinker, that's huge because, again, speaking with someone with quite severe dyslexia, I usually just jump straight in. I don't like the plodding and instructions and sit and listen. I can't do that very well. So actually in the design scramble, how it was built by our learning architect, Chung Man, was you can really hit at any point. You can go in and just start designing straight away. However, another learner might go off and do diligent research in the library. So through the design scramble, what I would say is anyone who's adopting projects or challenge or any of these types of forms of education is don't fall into the same trap as traditional learning and teach it very, very mechanically. Allow flexibility, not just in project selection, but actually where you enter and exit different points within the project. That really helps. If I go to Carrie's question, that really helps with the inclusion around learning differences.
I love that. And I think from my experience, it takes educators a bit of time to get comfortable with that because that kind of learning can appear messy. And so it takes people a bit of time to get comfortable with it. I think we have time for one more question before we need to start wrapping up. There's a great one from Lisa on, do you think online schools could merge successfully with brick and mortar schools so kids can dip in and out, part-time in schools and part-time online?
I'll chip in on this one again. Yes is the answer. I think this is the full vision of the online school, and we often jokingly call it the WeWork of education. We're all about flexibility. We're all about giving students freedom, and I think having centres in all major cities in the world and allowing students to dip in and out, one, solves the socialisation problem, allows in-person peer-to-peer learning, and two, just an exciting experience. You can imagine these spaces not being your traditional school, but a bit more like a science museum, things to play with, things to explore that all kind of feed back to your learner profile. So I think hybrid is the way forwards, but online is the starting point to get it to the masses, I think.
Yeah, to jump in there, I echo with what Carl has to say. We often conduct offline hackathons for students, not just as a platform for them to showcase what they've learned, but also for the social element. And essentially, we try and build in a workshop there as well, so that it helps with a little bit of retention and recall. So I agree 100%. While online first is the direction, a hybrid learning model does enhance substantially the learning path for students.
Absolutely. We know the future of work is hybrid, and why shouldn't the future of learning be hybrid? So it's this idea of having co-learning spaces and learning hubs, as we call them, and we share Carl's vision on this. Of having an online first approach and having hubs where learners can come together to access facilities, be safeguarded by adults, and socialize as well. So that could be a huge part of it as well. I know we've come to the end of the panel. Just wanted to say a huge thank you to our panelists. You're all doing incredible work. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I know our audience is engaged, and apologies to our audience that we can't go through every single question. I am going to invite our panelists to share whatever they're comfortable sharing in the chat, whether it's LinkedIn or email, so that you can keep in touch with us should you have any questions. My ask for everyone to the audience today is spread the word. I think one big part of this mission is raising awareness and opening up people's minds to what education could be. So if you had an aha moment, or there was a practice that was shared by one of the panelists that was eye-opening to you, share that with someone else, whether it be digitally or in person. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over back to Sarah now.
Great, thank you so much. I think I'll speak for everyone listening that was really brilliant and just so interesting and really informative. And you can see by the number of questions we've got how engaged everyone was with it. So we can pass the questions on, and if people do want to get in contact with the panel, please do. You can also see them in person at GESS Dubai a bit later in October. So that's happening on the 30th of October to the 1st of November at the Zabeel Halls, 4 to 6 at Dubai World Trade Centre. And we've just put a pop-up up if you want to register for free. It's taking place over all 3 days, and we've got loads of sessions. It's all for free and CPD accredited. And I'm sure you'll want to check these guys out there. You can also visit www.guessdubai.com to find out the full program and everything else. So there'll also be a short survey when we sign off. So please do tell us what you think and any topics you'd like to hear in the future. We'll also be uploading the webinar to our YouTube channel and on our GESS Education website, and we'll send it to all attendees by email because I'm sure you'll want to watch it again. So that just leaves me to say a massive big thank you to our panel and also to our audience. Our next webinar is on the 11th of October, and we'll be announcing more details soon. Take care and bye for now. Thank you.
Thank you.